There is a sound I have been waiting 20 years to hear. It is not the sound of an apology. It is not the sound of a door closing behind someone who finally leaves. It is the sound of footsteps on the servants' stairs at 6 o'clock a.m., hesitant, uneven, too slow for someone who used to command every room she entered. I hear them every morning now. I do not go down to help her. I simply listen, from my bedroom on the second floor. The room that used to belong to my father and my mother before Victoria erased them both, and I let the sound remind me that the house is mine. Not because anyone gave it to me. Because I took it back, piece by piece, the same way it was taken from me. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, my name is Jade, and this is the place where we talk about the families we were sold to, and the ones we have to buy back with interest. If you've ever stood outside a window looking at a life that should have been yours, hit subscribe. Not because I need an audience, but because you need to know that watching is not the same as waiting. And waiting is not the same as planning. Here's my story. I was 15 when my father died. It was a Tuesday in March, the kind of day that tricks you into thinking spring is coming when winter is still holding its breath. He was 54, healthy, the kind of man who ran 3 miles every morning and ate oatmeal with blueberries because his first wife, my mother, had made him promise to take care of his heart. He didn't die of his heart. He died of an aneurysm in his office at 2:14 p.m., sitting in the leather chair I used to spin in when I was small, the one that smelled like pipe tobacco, and the cedar pencils he used for crossword puzzles. He was dead before his secretary could dial 911. I found out when I came home from school and saw Victoria standing in the foyer in a black dress she had already pressed that morning, as if she had known. Victoria was my father's second wife. He married her when I was 8, 3 years after my mother died of breast cancer. Victoria was 52 when my father died, blonde in a way that cost money to maintain, with the posture of a woman who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. She had a son from her first marriage, Marcus, who was 20 at the time, and whom she called the prince in a voice that made it clear the title was not a joke. I was the orphan, or sometimes Jade, poor thing, said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. My father loved her, or needed her, or was simply too tired to be alone. I don't know which. What I know is that when he died, she became the executor of everything. The funeral was on a Saturday. By Monday, Victoria had already called the Swiss school. I found the brochure on her desk, a boarding school in the Alps, ideal for students requiring emotional distance and structured excellence. I was 15. I had just lost my father. I was not excellent. I was shattered. But Victoria sat me down in the library, the same library where my father had read me The Hobbit when I was 6, and she explained that the house was too full of memories, that I needed professional support, that she was only doing what my father would have wanted. She showed me a letter typed with his signature at the bottom. I know now that the signature was forged. I knew then that something was wrong, but I was 15 and grief had made me small, and Victoria had a way of making disagreement feel like a tantrum. Your father didn't leave a will, she said. We looked everywhere. The estate is complicated, debts, taxes. It's better if you're not here while we sort it out. You'll have a lovely room in Switzerland, mountains, fresh air. You'll thank me someday. I left 3 weeks later with 2 suitcases. I was not allowed to take my mother's jewelry. I was not allowed to take the photograph of my father holding me on the day I was born. I was allowed to take my clothes, my books, and a stuffed rabbit my mother had sewn that Victoria called sentimental clutter. I clutched that rabbit on the plane and told myself I would be back by Christmas. I did not come back by Christmas. The school was beautiful and cold. The other girls were daughters of diplomats and pharmaceutical heirs, children who spoke 3 languages and skied on weekends. I spoke English and grief, and I spent my weekends in the infirmary with stress headaches that the nurse treated with Valium and pity. Victoria called once a month, always on a Sunday at 4 o'clock p.m., always for exactly 7 minutes. She asked about my grades. She told me about Marcus's acceptance into business school. She never asked if I was lonely. She never mentioned the house. At 17, I was encouraged to apply to universities far from home. Home by then was a concept I couldn't locate on a map. I chose a state school in a city I had never heard of because it was the cheapest option and because Victoria made it clear that the estate could not afford an expensive education. I worked nights at a 24-hour diner, serving coffee to truck drivers and insomniacs. I slept on a couch in a graduate student's apartment, paying $200 a month for the privilege of a roof that leaked. I called Victoria once, in my sophomore year, to ask about the house. About my father's things. About whether there was any money left. Your father left debts, Jade, she said, her voice carrying the same smile she used at cocktail parties. I've been very generous keeping you in school. The house had to be refinanced. It's not yours anymore. It never was. You need to build your own life now. Be brave. I hung up. I did not call again. I changed my major to accounting that week. Not because I loved numbers, but because I hated the feeling of being erased by them. I wanted to understand how a man who owned a house, a business, and a life could leave his daughter with nothing but a stuffed rabbit and a forged letter. I became a CPA first, then a forensic accountant, then a specialist in estate fraud and asset tracing. I learned to read balance sheets the way other people read faces, looking for the lie hidden in the smile. I learned that money doesn't disappear. It moves. It hides. And if you are patient enough, if you are precise enough, you can follow it through every shell company and offshore account until you find the person who thought they were smarter than the paper trail. By 33, I had worked on 17 fraud cases. I had testified in court 4 times. I had a reputation for being cold, thorough, and unshakable. I lived in a studio apartment with white walls and no photographs, because photographs were evidence of a life you could lose. I had not been inside my father's house in 18 years. I had not seen Victoria in 18 years. I told myself I had moved on. I told myself the house was just wood and plaster, that memories were just electrical impulses in a brain that would someday die anyway. I told myself these things every night as I fell asleep on a mattress that cost less than Victoria's monthly hair appointments. And then I found the listing. It was a Tuesday. I was reviewing property records for a client, a routine asset trace, nothing personal, when a familiar address appeared on my screen. 47 Willowbrook Lane. The house where I was born. The house where my mother planted an oak tree in the backyard because she said it would outlive us all. The house where my father taught me to ride a bicycle on the gravel driveway, running beside me with his hand on the seat until I begged him to let go. It was for sale. Not just for sale. It was listed as a distressed estate property, motivated seller, all offers considered. The photographs showed rooms I recognized, the foyer with the black and white tiles, the kitchen with the farmhouse sink, the library where Victoria had told me my father left no will, but they were wrong. The furniture was different. The walls were painted colors my mother would have hated. My mother's oak tree was still visible through the kitchen window, but someone had installed a pool too close to its roots, and the tree looked sick, its leaves yellow in a way that made me physically ill to see. I clicked on the seller's name. Victoria Hale, my stepmother, she was 72 now. The listing said she was downsizing to accommodate a new business venture. I knew Marcus. I knew his business ventures. He had burned through 3 startups, 2 marriages, and most of his mother's liquid assets. Now he needed the house. He needed the capital, and Victoria was selling my mother's oak tree to save her son's pride. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt something colder, something that had been waiting 18 years in a locked drawer of my chest. I felt the click of a puzzle piece falling into place. I did not call a lawyer. I did not send a threatening letter. Those are the tools of people who want justice in the daylight. I wanted something else. I wanted to understand exactly how much she had taken and exactly how much she had left, and I wanted to be the one who decided what happened next. I spent 3 weeks building a cover. I created a limited liability company, Willowbrook Acquisitions, with a registered agent in Delaware and a website that looked like every other real estate investment firm on the internet. I rented a car I couldn't afford and bought a blazer that cost more than my monthly rent. I called the listing agent and introduced myself as Julia Carrington, a portfolio manager representing interested overseas buyers looking for heritage properties in the Northeast. The agent was eager. The house had been on the market for 4 months. There had been interest but no offers. The seller is particular, the agent said. She lives in the house. She's attached. But she's motivated. I understood. Victoria was attached to the house the way a spider is attached to a web. It was not love, it was strategy. The showing was scheduled for Thursday at 2:00 p.m. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing sunglasses I didn't need and carrying a leather portfolio I had bought at a thrift store. The house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had grown. The black and white tiles in the foyer were scuffed. The chandelier my mother had loved was gone, replaced by something modern and ugly. But the staircase was the same banister I had slid down at age 7, the same newel post my father had carved my initials into with his pocket knife. J.H. Jade Hale. I ran my finger over the letters while the agent wasn't looking, and I felt something crack inside me. Not break, crack, like ice on a river in early spring. Victoria came down the stairs slowly. She was thinner than I remembered, her blonde hair now white and cut in a style that tried too hard to be youthful. She was wearing a silk blouse and pearls, the uniform of a woman who still believed she was hosting a dinner party that mattered. "Miss Carrington," she said, extending a hand. "Welcome to my home." Her home. I shook her hand. Her skin was dry, papery. I did not squeeze too hard. I did not let go too fast. I smiled the smile I used in depositions, warm enough to be trustworthy, empty enough to be safe. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Hale. The photographs don't do it justice." She led me through the rooms, pointing out updates she had made, the kitchen renovation that removed my mother's garden window, the bathroom that had been my father's study, the cozy guest suite that had been my bedroom. I nodded and made notes in my portfolio. I asked about the HVAC system and the roof age and the property taxes. She answered with the confidence of a woman who had never been questioned by someone who knew what to look for. In the library, I paused. It looked different. The bookshelves were gone, replaced by built-in cabinets for a television. But the fireplace was the same marble mantel where my mother had placed her collection of blue glass bottles. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. The oak tree was worse than in the photographs. Its branches were bare in patches, and the new pool had been built so close that the roots were probably suffocating. "Beautiful tree," I said. "How old is it?" Victoria barely glanced out the window. "Oh, that old thing. My husband's first wife planted it. Sentimental nonsense. We're considering removing it to expand the pool area." I turned to face her. My face was still. My hands were steady. "That seems like a shame. Old trees have deep roots. They're hard to replace." "Everything can be replaced, Miss Carrington," she said, smiling. "That's the first rule of real estate." I smiled back. "I prefer the second rule. Location is everything, and this location has history. That's what my buyers are interested in. The story of the house." She liked that. She liked the idea that the house had a story she could sell. She didn't realize she was the villain in it. I asked to see the basement. She hesitated. Basements are where secrets live, but she couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. We went down the narrow stairs, and I smelled immediately what I was looking for. Damp, yes, but also the particular mustiness of old paper. The basement was unfinished, crowded with boxes and forgotten furniture. But in the corner, behind a stack of mildewed suitcases, I saw a filing cabinet. Metal, locked. The kind of cabinet a careful woman would use to store documents she didn't want found. "What's in the cabinet?" I asked casually. "Old papers," Victoria said. Too quickly. "Tax records. Boring things." I made a note. "Boring things." I left the showing after an hour, promising to run the numbers and circulate the proposal to my principals. Victoria walked me to the door, her hand on my elbow in a gesture of false intimacy. "I do hope we can make this work, Miss Carrington. I'm ready to move on. It's time for a new chapter." I drove away and did not look back in the rearview mirror. I had work to do. That night, I ran a title search. Then another. Then I pulled every public record I could find: tax liens, mortgage filings, corporate registrations, court documents. It took me 48 hours, working in shifts, drinking coffee until my hands shook. And by the end of it, I had found what I was looking for. Victoria had not been paying the property taxes, not for 3 years. She had refinanced the house twice, pulling out equity to fund Marcus's failed ventures. And the second mortgage was in default. Worse, much worse. I found evidence of unreported income from a shell corporation she had created to manage my father's business after his death. She had been siphoning money for 18 years, reporting losses to the IRS while depositing profits in an account in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were not enormous, a few thousand a month, carefully structured to avoid detection, but over 18 years, they added to more than the house was worth. And then I found the will. It was in the county archives, misfiled under the wrong docket number, probably by accident, possibly by design. My father had left a will. He had signed it 6 months before he died, witnessed by his accountant and his neighbor. It left everything to me: the house, the business, his savings, with a trust administered until I turned 25. Victoria was named as trustee. The will had never been probated. Instead, Victoria had filed a document claiming my father died intestate, and because she was his spouse, she had inherited everything. I held the document in my hands at 3 a.m., sitting on my kitchen floor, and I did not cry. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my safe, next to my passport and my stuffed rabbit. I had options. I could take the will to the police. I could sue. I could hire a lawyer and spend years in court. Watching Victoria spend my inheritance on legal fees, watching Marcus spin the story into a greedy stepdaughter trying to steal from a grieving widow. I could do all of that. And maybe I would win. Eventually. But I was not interested in eventually. I was interested in now. I went back to the property records. The tax delinquency was severe enough that the county had already initiated foreclosure proceedings. The auction was scheduled for 90 days out. If the taxes weren't paid in full, $4,000 to $7,000, the house would be sold at public auction to the highest bidder. Victoria didn't have $4,000 to $7,000. Her Cayman's account had been emptied last year to cover Marcus's latest debt. She was selling the house because she had to, because the auction was coming, and because she needed to control the narrative before the county did it for her. I made a decision. I paid the back taxes, not through Willowbrook Acquisitions. Through a separate LLC I created for this purpose, a nonprofit entity, technically, that specialized in historical property preservation. The county didn't care who paid as long as the check cleared. The foreclosure was stayed. The auction was canceled. Victoria received a notice that the taxes had been satisfied by a third-party creditor, which meant she owed the money to me now, not to the county. She probably didn't understand what that meant. She probably thought it was a gift from Marcus, or a bank error, or divine intervention. She was wrong. Then I waited. I waited for her to list the house again. She did 3 weeks later at a reduced price. I made an offer through Willowbrook Acquisitions, cash, 20% below asking, contingent on a 30-day close. She accepted in 48 hours. She was desperate. She needed the money to pay off Marcus's creditors. She needed to believe that someone still wanted what she was selling. The closing was scheduled for a Friday. I did not attend in person. I sent a lawyer, a young woman I had worked with on a previous case, with a power of attorney and instructions to say as little as possible. Victoria was there, wearing the same pearls, signing documents she didn't read. She didn't recognize the lawyer. She didn't recognize the LLC. She didn't recognize anything until the deed was recorded and the wire transfer cleared, and the house belonged to Willowbrook Acquisitions, which belonged to me. I owned the house on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, I had changed the locks. By Thursday, I had hired a contractor to drain the pool and build a protective barrier around my mother's oak tree. By Friday, I had moved into the master bedroom, my father's room, my mother's room, the room where I had been conceived and where I now plan to sleep for the first time in 18 years. But I was not done. I sent invitations. Not as Jade Hale. As Julia Carrington, the new owner, hosting a farewell celebration for the former resident. I invited everyone, Victoria's Bridge Club, Marcus's business associates, the neighbors who had watched me grow up and then watched me disappear, the cousins who had sent me birthday cards for 2 years and then stopped. I rented caterers. I hired a string quartet. I told the guests that Mrs. Hale had a special announcement to make about her exciting new chapter. Victoria thought the party was for her. She arrived at 7 p.m. in a lavender dress, her hair freshly set, Marcus on her arm looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't fit. She walked into the foyer, her foyer, or so she thought, and saw the guests, the flowers, the champagne. She smiled the smile of a woman who had spent her life believing that the world would always arrange itself around her. I waited until 8 p.m. I let her have her champagne. I let Marcus tell his stories about his upcoming IPO. I let the guests settle into the comfortable assumption that this was just another party in a life full of them. Then I walked down the stairs. I was wearing a black dress. Not the black of mourning, the black of a courtroom. My hair was pulled back. I carried no glass, no purse, nothing to distract from my hands. I walked to the center of the foyer and I waited for the conversation to stop. It took 10 seconds, maybe less. Good evening, I said, my voice carried. I had practiced this voice for 18 years in courtrooms and conference rooms and empty apartments. Thank you all for coming. My name is not Julia Carrington. My name is Jade Hale. I am Richard Hale's daughter. I lived in this house from the day I was born until I was 15, when my stepmother told me my father had left no will and sent me to a boarding school in Switzerland so she could take everything that was mine. Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her hand. It didn't break on the tile. It bounced once and rolled under a chair. No one moved to pick it up. This house, I continued, was left to me by my father. I have the will. I have the proof that it was never probated. I have 18 years of financial records showing that Victoria Hale embezzled from my father's business, evaded taxes, and used the proceeds to support her son's failed enterprises. I have filed reports with the IRS, the SEC, and the District Attorney's Office. Those investigations will proceed at their own pace. Marcus stepped forward, his face red. This is insane. This is slander. My mother is a respected, your mother, I said, turning to face him, is a thief. And you are the beneficiary of that theft. I am not here to debate that. The evidence speaks for itself. I walked to the library, my library now, and returned with a folder. I handed copies to 3 guests I had identified as journalists and to the neighbor who had been my father's closest friend. Then I turned back to Victoria. She had aged 10 years in 2 minutes. Her face was gray. Her hands were shaking. She looked at me with eyes that did not recognize me, not because I had changed, but because she had never really seen me in the first place. Why? She whispered. Because you sold me, I said, not to a school, not to a life. You sold me to make room for him, and now I am buying back what you took. Not with lawyers, not with time, with the exact currency you understand, possession. I let the silence hold. Then I said the thing I had planned for 6 months, the sentence I had rehearsed in mirrors and in dreams. You have 2 choices. Victoria, you can leave tonight. Pack what you can carry. I will have your remaining belongings delivered to whatever address you provide, or you can stay. She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes like a candle in a draft. Stay? Yes, as a tenant. There is a room on the 1st floor, the servants' quarters. It has a window that faces the driveway. It is small, but it is warm. I will draw up a lease. The rent will be symbolic, $1 a month, because I am not interested in your money. I am interested in your presence. I want you to wake up every morning in the house you stole, knowing that you sleep in the smallest room because I allow it. I want you to hear my footsteps on the stairs you used to own. I want you to look at my mother's oak tree through the kitchen window and know that you will never cut it down, because it is not yours to touch. Marcus grabbed his mother's arm. We're leaving, we're calling our lawyer. Call him, I said, but understand, I own this house. I own the debt you owe me, and I own the silence you thought you had purchased when you sent me away. You will not win in court, you will not win in the press. The only thing you can win is the choice I am offering you now. Victoria looked at me, really looked. And for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that was not calculation, it was comprehension. She understood that I was not angry. Anger burns out, I was something else, I was architecture. I was the house itself, solid, immovable, built on foundations she had tried to destroy but had only buried. I'll stay, she said. Marcus stared at her. Mother, I'll stay, she said again louder. I have nowhere else to go. She was right. The Cayman's account was empty. Marcus's apartment was leased in his name alone. Her bridge club would dissolve by next week. Once the story started, she had spent her life building a fortress of appearances, and I had just walked through the front door with the deed in my hand. The guests left quickly after that. The journalists stayed longest, asking questions I answered with the precision of a deposition. When they were gone, I stood in the foyer alone, listening to the house settle around me. It sounded different now. Not quieter, more honest. That was 6 months ago. Victoria lives in the servants' quarters now. She wakes at 6:00 a.m., I hear her footsteps on the stairs, and she makes herself tea in the kitchen. She does not use the good china. She knows better. She tends the garden, sometimes, though she avoids the oak tree. She has not spoken to Marcus in 3 weeks. He stopped returning her calls when he realized she could not help him with his legal troubles. The IRS investigation is ongoing. The district attorney has not filed charges yet, but they will. I am patient. I have always been patient. I sleep in the master bedroom, in a bed I bought myself because Victoria's mattress smelled like her perfume. I hung my mother's blue glass bottles on the mantel. I had the built-in cabinets removed and the bookshelves restored. I am reading The Hobbit again, slowly, the way my father read it to me, 1 chapter a night. I have placed my stuffed rabbit on the pillow beside me. It is faded and one ear is loose, but it is mine. It has always been mine. This is not a happy ending. I do not forgive Victoria. I do not believe she is sorry. I believe she is tired, and that is not the same thing. I do not know if I will let her stay forever. Maybe I will. Maybe I will evict her when the lease expires, or when the tree recovers, or when I simply wake up one morning and decide I am done. The point is not the duration. The point is the choice. For 18 years, she chose what happened to me. Now I choose what happens to her. And every morning when I hear her footsteps on the servants' stairs, I am reminded that the house is not just wood and plaster. It is memory, it is territory, it is mine. I am not healed. I do not know if healing is possible when the wound was inflicted by someone who still lives in your house. But I am no longer erased. I am no longer the orphan in the Alps, the cashier on the night shift, ghost in the property records. I am Jade Hale. I am 33 years old. I am the daughter my father left behind and the woman who came back to claim what was always hers. If you are out there reading property listings at 3 a.m. looking for the house you lost, stop looking. Start tracing. Start building. Start buying back your own story, one document at a time, until the door opens not because someone let you in, but because you own the key. I'm Jade. I'm 33, and this is my house now. See you in the next story.